Right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar. And Matt Helmers with Iowa State University, Department of Ag and Biosystems Engineering, the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, and also faculty advisor to the Iowa Learning Farms. So it's my great pleasure to get to moderate the webinar again today and be able to introduce one of our ABE grads. Spencer Pech is a graduate of the Department of Ag and Biosystems Engineering here at Iowa State. Has gone on to do great things and highlight that last fall he was one of the award winners of the New Voices in Water in Iowa. And so I'll put the link in there. So later, if you want to go, there's a short video about Spencer and a little more background on him. So he is a civil engineer with ISG Inc. He is going to talk to us today about designing multi-purpose drainage systems to meet modern demands, excuse me. As always, if you have questions, feel free to type those into the chat box and we'll get those to Spencer at the end of his talk. With that, Spencer, the virtual floor is all yours.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate the kind introduction and excited to be here today. Used to being on the other side of the screen for these and been a long time attendee, so appreciate the opportunity to be a presenter here. So as Matt mentioned, I'm Spencer Peck, civil engineer with ISG. Here to talk a little bit about some of the work we do in designing multi-purpose drainage systems. A little bit of background about me, as Matt had mentioned, graduate of the AB department at Iowa State, grew up on a family farm, really passionate outdoorsman, as you can see from my photo here. So really kind of marrying those two together, really passionate about agriculture and water quality in the outdoors as well. Just a quick background on ISG. We're a full service architecture and engineering firm, Midwest based. We have over 500 professionals across 11 offices across the Midwest. I currently work out of the Waterloo office here in Eastern Iowa. And we have our business units here on the right, primarily working in our water business unit. We have architects, engineers, planning ecologists, you name it, we've got it on staff here. A little more specific about our water resources team, specifically our rural water resources. Primarily our work is in Iowa and Minnesota, specifically northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, starting to expand a little from there, additionally into South Dakota. But a lot of the clients we're working with on these projects, county drainage authorities, county drainage trustees, watershed districts, watershed policy boards, lake associations, municipalities, different organizations, state entities, state agencies, as well as some private entities as well. So we work on a variety of different projects with a variety of different clients. Primarily the projects I'll be talking about today are going to be kind of in our county drainage sector, where we're working with county drainage trustees or drainage authorities on drainage district projects. So I have to admit, I did borrow this slide, our business unit lead, Chuck Randall, but I think it does a really good job of giving a little bit of framework and background for the environment that we work in some of the things that we have to consider when we're designing our projects. Just to kind of note a few, the infrastructure needs. A lot of the systems we're working on were originally designed and installed 100 or more years ago, and the farming practices, the crops being grown are much more intense than they were back then. So we're kind of a whole different ball game in terms of the systems we're designing compared to what's there. And we have to design these systems to handle bigger equipment, as well as faster kind of farming operations and things like that. Economic, that's always a challenge, not only for our projects in terms of construction costs and instability in markets. We felt like we had a pretty good feel on some of the pricing of our projects until just the last couple of years. All that's kind of got thrown out. But additionally, the economic aspect of working with landowners and farmers of commodity markets, and considering the value of drainage and the value of projects that we're doing and what that might be for them. Processes and review. Our projects are under as much review and consideration as they've ever been. So not only do we have to consider what our clients' goals and needs are, but we have to consider maybe some of those outside agency reviews and other potential stakeholders that would be impacted, and take those into consideration with our designs. And then on the political side, a lot of our projects are working with landowners or within a watershed, but a lot of times the decision makers for those projects are not necessarily the landowners. They may be elected officials, county supervisors, county commissioners, and so they have a really great challenge on their hands in terms of working with us to develop a solution that's going to make most people happy. Right, we're never going to make everybody happy, but we do the best we can to consider all folks who are at the table and all their varying perspectives. And then kind of on the more technical side, Mother Nature, thinking about changing climate patterns and maybe not necessarily more rainfall overall, but more intense rainfall. So greater rainfall patterns in the spring, but maybe less rainfall in the summer. So considering the drainage needs and requirements in the spring, but also potentially maybe what are the crop requirements in the summer with those drier conditions. And so kind of pulling that all together, that brings us to our design approach on our projects. And really what we try to do is use the best technology we have and consider kind of maybe new ideas or different types of solutions that haven't been used before, and get the designs right. So not necessarily traditional designs, but new and different types of designs, get it right, use our technology to design it and then sell it to our clients. So kind of taking a step forward into what that might look like for us working with a client. Starting with really a multi-purpose drainage management plan, working with, say, a drainage district or a watershed district or something similar. We're going to start by looking at that entire watershed that we're working in, and we're going to start with a desktop review using just LiDAR data and whatever's information is available to take a look at existing infrastructure, drainage infrastructure that might be there, public infrastructure in terms of drainage district systems, as well as any known private systems, any other existing DMPs, what kind of the risks and concerns of everybody are. So do we have a lake at the outlet where we need to be considering sediment and phosphorus is a big concern in the area. Nitrates, what kind of concerns are there? Looking at historic information, as well as you'll see here some drone aerials so we can really start to look at where the problem areas in this watershed, what are some things that we need to consider in our design. And then we're going to very early on take a look at all the different potential BMPs that could be incorporated into this watershed in different locations and what maybe their values are. And we're going to provide visuals of all that to the landowners very early on in alignment with any other existing watershed plans or existing projects. And really do our best to provide those visuals, whether it's through maps or drone videos, example projects, things like that. In that early coordination, we found can really lead to much more successful project implementation when the landowners have that opportunity to see all the kind of different options that are available to them. So next, I'm going to kind of run through a little bit of a case study of a drainage district here in Iowa that we worked on recently, where we had kind of this type of situation come up with it with the multi-purpose drainage management. So this particular drainage district is Joint Drainage District 3, and actually the portion of the watershed we were looking at was all in Osceola County, Iowa. So you see the watershed here in red with all the drainage district facilities there in black. Don't have any private tile shown on here, but obviously there's a lot of that. This, like many systems we work on, originally constructed in 1917, over 100 years old. Like many systems we work on, 20 to 30% of the kind of current minimum recommended drainage capacity, looking at like a baseline half-inch drainage coefficient. So very undersized and very old, and also had some very significant drown out locations in it. One in particular that you're going to hear me talk about a lot is this area right here. Actually is historical chain lake. So prior to the establishment of the district, this was actually a lake here. And then obviously with the establishment of the district, it was drained. So we have some pretty significant areas of drownouts. It's not always the case, but in this case, we had some very engaged landowners. Very high percentage of landowners in this watershed are owner operators, very familiar with drainage, the importance of drainage, and very interested in different solutions that would suit their needs. So if we were to look at this, this blue line down here represents a drainage ditch, open ditch, everything else is tile. If we were to look at this branch tile, which outlets here and continues up a number of miles here, just from a traditional improvement standpoint, looking at what would be required to provide adequate drainage improvement for those lands. We're looking at some options of a 60-inch size pipe for a tile main or 25-foot plus deep ditch. Both options, very significant improvements just for this main, also considering some other branches. Costs on the average, working well over $1,200 an acre. And again, that's just for this tile system here, this main, not considering any additional laterals that would have to be considered. So just a traditional replace the old pipe with a new one approach, or considering putting in a new open ditch, presented a lot of challenges. And we thought, we can do a little better than the traditional improvement here. So one of the first things we're going to do in a project like this is we're going to start out with the watershed, and we're going to run a model on it. So we're going to run ICM as a program we use for this particular one, a model on the watershed to get a better idea for what's going on in the watershed, and maybe where we can work to implement some BMPs or focus our efforts on the drainage improvement. So the inputs are shown here. Basically all of the information in the watershed is considered: tile information, culverts, drainage ditches, waterways, road ditches, land use, soil information, as well as topography and elevation information. And then for our kind of consideration on our project, these were some of the return periods we were running to review in the watershed. So looking at this from an agricultural productivity standpoint, really any return period beyond this is not something that we can really design for anyway. So this is where we limited our review on it. So putting that all together in that model here, this is what we get for a result, and this is what we're able to use to review the watershed. So what I'm going to show you here on this model run is two parallel runs of a 10-year storm. On the left, you're going to see the existing condition. And when we say existing, we mean as constructed. So this is as it was constructed in 1917, assuming it still functions in that way. Likely there's some restrictions, but that's the assumption we make. And then on the right is that proposed improvement with a tile improvement that I talked about, which starts out at 60-inch and goes on down from there. So this is kind of the traditional drainage improvement to meet a minimum recommended drainage coefficient versus existing. So I'm going to start this here. Just want to point out up on the top left, the first number is the number of days that have passed, and then the second number is the hours. So we'll let this run here, and then we'll see everything fill up in the watershed there, about 16 hours or so. And we'll let it run. As you can see on the proposed, things are already starting to drain down faster. Something that's really going to stand out on both options, though, is I think we can pretty obviously see where that lake was at historically prior to drainage improvements. So the color, the deeper the water, the darker the color, obviously. But this is to represent the inundation in the watershed, even with the tile drainage there. So we'll let this run here, and we'll see how this drains down. Over time, we'll start to see some of these potholes drain. And actually, we were able to use this model to take a look at. So we had improved this main in the model, but we had not improved, and as well as this main, but we had not considered some of these branches over here yet. And we were able to use this model to identify some of these additional branches, point them out to the landowners and say, hey, here's some additional areas we need to consider some improvement to really get the most benefit out of our improved outlet. So that was another value that the model was able to bring us in this design. But you'll see now at about 2 days after inundation, the last of that chain link bottom is draining out. We've got a few of these potholes in this run. These branches are not improved, but we'll see the last of those potholes drain away. So that 2 days is really what we're shooting for in terms crop drown out to try to avoid any crop loss. And so having all of that drained away within those 2 days is what we'd like to see. So as you'll see here, the last of these adjacent potholes are draining down, but the chain lake bottom on the existing condition slowly starting to drain down a little bit. And I will say that we presented this model to the landowners, and I believe that shows that the 4.5-inch rain or whatever it is takes about 7 or 8 days to drain. And we did not get much disagreement from the landowners. They agreed that yes, when you look at that sort of a storm event, you're talking that number of days just to drain that down. So this is really valuable for us for design purposes, but also for visualization for the landowners so they can see what we're looking at and how we're considering the design in that. So moving on, one thing I just want to touch on before we talk about that is really what we're going to focus on here is this historical lake bottom here and how can we do our best to provide better drainage for that area as well as other areas, but also do it in kind of a more multi-purpose manner. So what we came up with, what I'm calling a hybrid kind of storage wetland design. So you'll be able to see on the next slide where exactly this is located at, but it's just upstream of that historical chain lake basin. And what this is a constructed wetlands storage basin where we've got the upstream tile mains outletting directly into the basin. We've got within it a sediment forebay for sediment considerations. And then we've got a permanent shallow pool in there for the denitrification aspect and water quality. Additionally, potential for some pool and permanent storage, but then beyond that, really on the drainage aspect, looking at the temporary storage of the pool. So we have a permanent water level, say here, where it will stay under normal conditions. And then when we have a storm event and we've got increased flow coming in from these mains, we're going to see that water level rise and temporarily store that water in this pond until it reaches the top of a structure, at which point it would overflow an outlet into the downstream tile main. So adding, in this case, roughly 30 acre-feet of temporary storage for those storm events to help with the downstream drainage. And what we found, and you'll see in doing this, is if we can temporarily store some of that water during those storm events, it has a great effect on the downstream drainage condition from there. So this solution here provides that drainage benefit, the base flow denitrification aspect, as well as that peak flow reduction and some other benefits too that we'll talk about a little more later. So looking at this second ICM model here, what's on the left on this run is going to be what was on the right before. So this is your what I'll call traditional improvement. And then on the right is going to be this hybrid improvement with the pond incorporated. So I'll let this start here and then I can show you what to look for. So we see both fill up and the basin fills up as well as all the other potholes fill up about the same in both. What you'll notice here is the location of the pond, this dark blue area. So just upstream of the chain lake bottom, we've got our pond shown, obviously no pond here. And so we'll just let this run and see how this drains down. So what you should see in both options here is both of these draining down in about the same time frame and manner, and we're seeing that inundation disappear right around that 2-day period. What we're going to see on this option after all of that inundation drains down is this color get lighter as you see the pond. Then after temporary storing, that water is going to drain down and return to its permanent water elevation after the rest of the areas have drained. So the key to this, both options providing the same level of drainage for the landowners, but the big difference being this tile main, roughly 3 miles downstream of the pond, we were able to decrease our drainage coefficient sizing for that, which resulted in essentially 1 pipe size decrease, if you will. So when you're talking about 3 miles of pipe, that becomes pretty significant over 3 miles. So where that kind of takes us is the win-win solution for the landowners in this instance is that they can get the improved drainage and productivity of the drainage project. So they're getting much better use of their lands, much better drainage and productivity by incorporating that storage pond wetland into the project. We're estimating somewhere around $200 an acre in savings, roughly $800,000 in savings, just because of that tile main savings, making it smaller. When you get into pipe sizes that large, the price really goes up pretty quickly, especially over 3 miles of pipe. And that was contingent on receiving some water quality funding, which we were expecting for the construction of the basin. But again, we have the water quality benefit, both the denitrification of the base flow within that tile water within the storage wetland, but also the peak flow reduction. So looking at both improvement options with storage, we had significantly lower outlet peak flow and significantly lower surface flow through the watershed with the implementation of that pond and that storage. And one kind of additional aspect of this where we're able to add that pond in is providing a free flowing outlet for that upstream tile. So we had landowners that really appreciated that because they've talked a lot about previous conditions where they mentioned something to the extent of their intakes had more water traditionally come out of them than go in them. So they knew that having that free flowing outlet would stop any previous surcharge conditions they've had. So that was a benefit to them. And then one that I briefly touched on earlier, the potential for drainage water recycling. So we had actually a unique situation here where the landowner who would potentially have the basin on their property had a kind of a sand hill nearby and be interested in harvesting some water out of there for irrigation on his property there. So that was kind of an additional value add benefit to him. This photo here is actually a different pond. So this project specific, we've not constructed that main improvement or pond there. I mentioned economics earlier. With some of the pipe price increases overall, the drainage improvement project, the landowners decided to hold off for the time being, but really great win-win solution for them and something that gets us really excited when we can marry together, the water quality benefit and aspect, but also the drainage improvement and the drainage benefit aspect to landowners. So I want to talk through additionally one other project that we worked on, kind of same idea here, but a little different goals with this one. So this is in Minnesota, Martin County Ditch 29, Judicial Ditch 367. Two districts, one drains into the other one, and then outlets through a series of lakes with very flat to little to no grade. Again, same story that you're going to hear a lot with these systems. Very old, very flat, very shallow, undersized. Not enough capacity is also failing. So there was a petition for the improvement of the tile. But with that, in the state of Minnesota, there has to be consideration for the adequacy of the downstream outlet. So landowners can consider improving that tile to get an improved drainage, but they need to ensure that the outlet is adequate to take that additional flow. So when you're talking about an outlet of 0% grade into multiple lakes downstream, that doesn't sound very adequate to me. So we're going to have to consider with that no additional capacity available downstream and a lot of concerns for flooding and water quality in some of those lakes downstream, there had to be consideration for some storage. So in this case, adding the storage into the system, we were able to essentially increase the drain or improve the drainage upstream, add storage near the outlet, or temporarily store that water so that we didn't have any of those downstream impacts, but we could still get the improved drainage upstream. So this was actually a really cool project where we reviewed that MDM plan, multi-purpose arrangement plan that I mentioned earlier, presented it to the landowners with some potential options, and we actually had willing landowners come forward and volunteer to say, yeah, we'd be interested in looking at the storage being on our property. So really cool storage pond that was constructed for this. What you'll see in this drone photo when it's full is that it appears to be just one large pond, but actually, as you'll see here, there's kind of two separate areas to it. So overall, the entire pond is 34 acres, has 170 acre feet of temporary storage. So pretty significant amount of storage. There's a partnership with an existing easement and some additional outside funding, constructed in 2017 with little maintenance to date, but we do take into consideration some sediment cleaning and forebays and things like that. So this pond actually has our more pond portion over here. And then off to the side here, this one has actually more wetland characteristics where we have the shallower pool to add the wetland characteristics in. So when this thing fills up temporarily, and it fills up as all as one large pond. But during normal base flow conditions, there's a shallower pool over here to get those wetland characteristics as well, and all the benefits that come along with that. So one other thing I want to talk about, kind of an emerging practice that I'm really excited about and excited to be working on much more recently, drainage water recycling. Thank you to Transforming Drainage for these great visuals, which I'm using often. But again, this is another aspect where I think we can add this into a lot of our drainage designs with storage, where we can look at improving the crop yield potential with those changing climate patterns, where the storage, as I mentioned, we can improve water quality and quantity downstream. We can improve drainage coefficient, drainage capacity with the storage. But then also with this, we can look at, can we add some additional permanent storage in there into the project that becomes available for irrigation during those dry weather conditions in the spring. So save the extra water from the tile drainage in the spring, reuse it in the summer. Sounds like a great solution to me. And again, this can be a really great value add, as I mentioned before, for the landowner that's willing to implement the BMP on their land. They can have that potential to harvest that tile water for their irrigation purposes. So just want to touch on with this, some work been working on with Iowa Soybean Association and Chris Hay on kind of scaling up some of this drainage water recycling and storage across the landscape and some priority watersheds. Working at kind of started out with some site eligibility and mapping, identifying some potential sites throughout these areas. And then right now working on landowner engagement aspect to really get things ramped up with this, and then hopefully leading into some funding and project implementation to do a lot more of this drainage water recycling and storage designs across the landscape. So I do want to just briefly touch on this slide with these projects, some of the challenges we face, and kind of the process we have to step through and the boxes we have to check to get there. First things first, we need to find a suitable site, a suitable watershed. Most often we find that with these drainage districts or systems with that existing infrastructure that's 100 years old and all needs to be replaced anyway. Can we coordinate that with storage to do it all in one project? That seems to work the best. But then in doing such, we have to have landowner interest to incorporate the BMP. And then with that, if there's a large improvement or repair project, there has to be buy-in from the watershed wide landowners to be interested in the project as well. And if we can do all that, then we've got to coordinate the agencies, regulatory bodies, and all that goes with that to complete the design and incorporate the project. So just want to briefly touch on a couple of my examples. If I had more time, I'd love to talk about wetlands and edge of field practices, which we've done many designs for as well, but these were kind of the two of the example projects I wanted to show with those multi-benefit solutions. So I know I'm running out of time here, but I do have one more slide I want to cover. It's been kind of a pet project of mine. Anytime we're working on these drainage projects with these watersheds, the consideration of the economics of this is something that I think is often overlooked. These types of projects, a little bit of background. These aren't what I would call generational investments. I'd call them multi-generational investments, right? So these are happening not even once every 100 years. So this is a very large investment that landowners are making. The current drainage condition is a baseline. So, that slough in my field there, it takes 7 days to drain. And that's just the way it is. They don't know anything different. They don't know how much potential yield and productivity they're missing out on because of their poor drainage condition. And these are very significant investments. These for improvements, these costs are often going to exceed $1,000 an acre on average or more. So these are very significant investments to landowners. And just with those kind of factors considered, this is just often a non-starter for landowners when they see the price tag. And so what I've kind of tried to work on, and I have to give Dr. Helmers a shout out for helping me with some of the literature research and finding some literature on this, but wanted to look into how can we quantify the economic feasibility of these drainage improvements and their benefit. So in some of the information I was able to find from a soil conservation service study done in the 80s, and took some of that data that they had available, did some yield trend adjustments to account for crop yields and genetic improvements in the 80s, and was able to take a run at comparing drainage benefit based on soil type and drainage conditions. So looking at the soils in the watershed, and then looking at the current and proposed drainage condition and what can we expect for yield increases for that for a watershed, and in turn, what's the economics of the project. So this is first run that I've made at this. And really what we're looking at is, again, the different soil types and then estimating the yield increases, throwing in some commodity prices, estimating the benefits, looking at the project cost, and then trying to estimate a payback period for the landowners. So this is something that's been kind of a work in progress for me. And it's something that I think is really exciting, and something we can add into our projects that will really help landowners understand the scope and the value that these types of projects can provide to them long term in their operation. So if there's anybody out there who's half as interested in drainage economics as I am, I'd love to talk more on it. So with that, I'll thank everyone for listening in today, and thank you also to Dr. Helmers and Iowa Learning Farms for the opportunity to present to everyone and talk about our work.
Great, Spencer. Yeah, there might not be that many of us interested in drainage economics, but some of us can geek out on that. So I want to let you know, if you need a CCA CEU, if you can let Elena Whitaker know by today at 5 o'clock, you need to email her your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. And her email is alenaw@iastate.edu. So Elena w@iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. Get your questions in. We'll go to the next slide here. Okay, if you watch this webinar live and you're willing to fill out our voluntary demographic survey, we'd greatly appreciate it. You can go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey, or you can scan the QR code there. Only one survey response is needed for all 2023 webinars. But so if you've already filled this out, thank you so much. And if you're willing to fill it out, we really appreciate it. So you can scan that QR code or iowalearningfarms.org/survey. And a plug for the webinar next week. We're going to move to Indiana. Seth Harden with the Upper Wabash, who is the Upper Wabash River Project Director with the Nature Conservancy, is going to talk about conservation adoption, the role of the trusted advisor. So look forward to that, and hopefully you'll consider tuning in. But as I said, we have a few questions for Spencer. What kind of data or kind of how is the model calibrated? Is it the IMC model?
Oh, ICM. Yep. Yeah.
ICM. Sorry. Yeah. ICM model.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So one of the things we can actually do, we've done in the past to calibrate our models, is calibrate it to storm events that happen. So if we have lucky enough to have a rainfall happen, we'll go out with our drone and fly the watershed after that, and then we can compare that to our model to calibrate and make sure that we're matching the real condition. I will say I'm admittedly not the expert on the modeling. I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to answer super well. So that is one of the big things we've done for calibration, but there's certainly others at our group that could speak much better to that as well. I'd be glad to put you in touch with if you have more questions on the modeling.
Great. Well, I just will say, while you were talking, I was looking at the at Google Earth at the location that you had for the site in Osceola County, and I'll say your ponded location looks very similar to the drowned out in 2011 at the site. So this is what that's my home county, and so I kind of knew where that was based on a couple things. So looked pretty good. So there's another question here. with what you've shown to date, you're really looking at the main system, not necessarily the lateral. So, this question was whether any tile was installed on the lateral to conserve water during dry times, but that wasn't necessarily a part of most of the projects that you were talking about.
Yeah, that's correct. We're mostly looking at the mains. In a watershed of like the scale of the Osceola County one, there's a number of branch tiles too off to the side that we were looking at as well. Some of them for improvement, some of them not. But primarily our designs are looking at the outlet of the system, and then landowners will often have their own private tile in their fields and their own management practices within their own fields.
So you talked a lot about kind of the water storage. I could envision some of these might have water quality benefits. Have any of the projects that have been built to date worked to also document some of the water quality benefits that might be provided in these? Have there been any testing on any of them?
That's a great question. In terms of the storage ponds, I would have to check with our Minnesota team on that. They have a lot more of them that have been in place for a lot longer up there. I think they may have done a little bit of monitoring, but I don't have anything off the top of my head.
Yeah, it seemed like from listening to Chuck talk as well that this
Yep.
has been done a little bit more in Minnesota and kind of now migrating down to Iowa
Exactly.
to think about doing. So, yeah, it's so exciting. I have to say, as a water engineer and interested in drainage, this is just it's so cool to think about designing more water storage in there. And I guess with another one, kind of thinking about the multi-purpose drainage management plan, do you know of any work looking at considering the impacts on wildlife, consulting with any wildlife folks on maybe the design of any of these storage features to maximize any other ecological benefits?
Yeah, I know one of the things we've done just comes to mind in Minnesota, and we've considered with some of the buffers and areas around it is working with our plant ecologists to do some native plantings for the areas around it. And then, as I mentioned, incorporate some of that shallow pool in, where we have that permanent shallow pool there for the wetland characteristics. Just a couple things that come to mind.
There are kind of a couple questions about this. Are kind of the infield management taking into consideration when you're designing these systems, whether there's, maybe it's a no-till or no-till with cover crop, is that taken into account in the kind of in the modeling or the design of these systems?
Yes, in terms of the modeling, we'll look at kind of the soil condition, I guess, or the cover condition. In terms of individual fields management practices, I guess, if there is any like existing storage or drainage water management, we'd certainly take that into account. Honestly, we haven't run into a ton of that yet on any designs where there's that existing in the watershed. But if there is, that certainly is going to be supported by us because it's going to make the outlet much more adequate in designing. But yeah, any of that we'll definitely consider when we're running the model as well.
Another one is, as part of the modeling process, do you ever identify potential for incorporating water quality wetlands over sections of the main that could reduce the cost of drainage improvements by effectively abandoning a portion of the main and putting a wetland in place, utilizing state and federal cost share?
Yeah, I wish I had more time. I have a project where we did that exact thing. We're going to save a lot of money actually. Put a wetland in and not have tile main through that stretch. So yeah, that's one of the great things about the model is we can identify locations where that makes sense to do that. That's yeah, it's an awesome value, an awesome additional opportunity beyond just storage consideration, but just incorporating a wetland where we can show some savings to landowners as well.
It's one of the things that I might talk about is in some of these cases where we get this improved drainage, it may facilitate us with some of our infield practices as well. So things like no-till, sometimes in some of these areas, we might be doing that tillage to warm up and dry out the soil. And if we have a little better drainage, we may be able to facilitate some of those infield conservation practices that we want as well.
I did have, I don't know if it came up on yours, Matt, but I had a direct message with somebody I think is worth mentioning. They asked about improving the drainage and producers staying in compliance with federal wetland rules. I do think that's worth mentioning.
Yeah,
Yes,
great.
I'm glad that somebody brought that up. That is always going to be a consideration with our projects, especially on improvements consideration, especially with Lotus recently and some of the things that are in flux there. We're going to be considering any wetlands that might be in the watershed and how we can either mitigate those or ensure no impacts to them in these types of improvement projects.
I'm glad somebody asked that, and great response. I'm glad you were able to answer that and I didn't have to try, but yeah, you're going to follow all rules and regulations. So there's one, is the 10-year storm commonly used to design these projects? And did you check the performance with more extreme events?
Yeah, I would say if you look at a very traditional design, you're looking at mostly just in terms of a drainage coefficient. So looking at like a 1/2 inch drainage coefficient, really kind of the standard number you see a lot of times for design. And we're learning more as we do more of these models. The 10-year is kind of where that lands as a storm we can consider as you start to get into those larger storm events. We have looked at them, and certainly the drainage improvement will greatly improve the level of drainage provided, or how long the flooding or inundation occurs in those fields. But in terms of being able to design for them to limit crop loss becomes pretty difficult and really just not feasible in many systems.
In that first example, would it also be a possibility of enrolling that drained lake into a CP 23A, and that the landowner might get a payment of about 300 per acre per year, and so there might not be a cost to the district, and it could serve as an outlet to the upstream users with improvements above the drained lake?
Yeah, that was another option we looked at, and yeah, that's a great idea because that's a huge area that could be restored. Essentially, what it came down to was not something that actually multiple landowners involved, because such a large area, not something that they were interested in at that time. They had recently invested quite a bit into their private tile in that area and farming that, and they wanted to look at a solution where they could improve the drainage and still be able to farm that with also kind of considering the water quality aspect. But yeah, great area to consider doing a wetland restoration to. It would have been a huge wetland if we did.
Yeah, and as I look at it, I could see that it looks like, unfortunately, that area, that the lake is kind of right in the middle of that section. So there's like probably multiple landowners. If it was offset by a bit and just had 1/4, you might be reduced in the number of landowners that you'd have to get on board.
Yep.
So, all right, I think that is the questions that we have. Really want to thank Spencer for excellent talk today, and for the work and the support that ISG, the work that ISG is doing, and the support they've given to the drainage industry and efforts we've done, like the drainage symposium last fall. And make sure, if you need a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW, at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today with your name and the name you entered to watch the webinar and your CCA number. And with that, again, thank you very much. Tune in next week for a discussion of work in the Upper Wabash, and I'll give Spencer the last word.
Yeah, no, thank you everybody for attending, and thanks Matt again for the opportunity to talk about what we do. Happy to do that anytime. So
all right, well, that means we'll get you back sometime. So all right, thanks, Spencer.
Yep, thank you.